All right, let's discuss this further then. We are now joined by Community Police and Gangs Negotiation Team member. Welcome, Witbooi, and Dereleen James then joins us via Zoom. Well, a very warm welcome to both of you, and thanks very much for joining us. I'm going to start then with you. Welcome. I heard you in that clip that we earlier played. You were talking about the fact that you're looking for this peaceful resolution, but that you want to get to the bottom of what the actual sort of problems are, the underlying problems. Have you gotten closer to that in the time that you've been in these sort of negotiations, what the actual sticking points are?
So thank you so much for having me on the show today. And it's also important to mention that we do want the public to know what's going on, and also to keep them informed that things are happening on the ground to get some kind of peaceful resolution taking place. But what we normally and what we predominantly have come to ascertain is that there's a lot of animosity amongst certain groups of people. There's a lot of, as we said, it's a territorial situation. And what we are trying to establish and come to now is just to make sure that we can reach a peaceful agreement where the loss of innocent lives can come to an end, especially young people being involved in the senseless and stupid warfare amongst people that are just doing this because they want to make a point. And that's where we are currently at. We're still at stalemate, but negotiations are still ongoing.
I mean, is there a way to get to the bottom of this animosity? I mean, if it's the kind of animosity that is so extreme to the point where people are actually willing to kill each other, what does one begin in fixing a situation like that? And maybe I'm asking you, where have you actually started in this negotiation?
I think at this specific moment, we know that in South Africa we have a high unemployment rate. And many of these young people, they join these gangs, and because of that, it creates that type of situation where most of the young people feel like that is where they need to be and that's where they belong. So if government can play their part in ensuring that young people do have positive things to do or positive places or employment for them, it will minimize and even eradicate the influence of gangsters or gang leaders over these young boys and girls' lives. So we currently understand that it's a high employment rate. It's politically motivated in many other cases. We also do know that there's a lot of promises made by government to have more boots on the ground to say, let us create a safety zone for people of Eldorado Park, for people of these communities that are suffering under this violence, but yet nothing happens. So people are left to fend for themselves, and I mean, Dereleen James can tell you that she's been on the ground trying to get the police to be involved, trying to get every other stakeholder to help with these processes, but negotiations at this specific moment is just territorial, and these men are claiming that they need to get this, they need to get that, and we say, how do you get all of this by using these young kids as a puffer, as a scapegoat to reach your means at the end of the day. That's what we're trying to negotiate.
And let's bring you in then, Dereleen. Let's talk about some of the issues that you have indeed then identified then on the ground. Welcome was talking about addressing some of those grievances, and I would assume that in this situation there are many grievances. Maybe you can point us to some of those. I mean, Welcome talks about the fact that you have conversations with police and you try to get the police involved, but on the back of that, I'm also hearing that police themselves are sometimes involved in these issues and some of these gang wars, and when that situation happens, I mean, how do you get to the bottom of it?
You know what I think? Thank you so much for having me, Flo, and hi there, welcome. I think, what the situation has perpetuated over the years for the mere fact that it has been left for way too long. We have highlighted the situation in Eldorado Park way back in 2013, where we said, we're on the verge of mirroring the Cape Flats. And to date, we see just that. I think where my disappointment comes in is the fact that the fact that we are going to social media and being on media all the time and speaking about this year in and out, people think that Eldorado Park is drugs and Westbury and colored people are drugs and gangs. I think that's the one thing that saddens me. And yet the reality in Eldorado Park is the shooting and the gangs and the drugs, and especially where all the killings has happened, it's confined to all of two hotspots. It's extension 2 and it is extension 4. We've highlighted this over and over and over to SABC, and to date we don't have an operational plan. We have highlighted the problem. They know exactly where the problem lies. They know exactly who are the people causing the chaos in this community, but a plan to address it is just not forthcoming for the longest time ever. We've also mentioned in the past that, the police needs to deploy counter to investigate allegations of corruption at our police station. And that hasn't happened. Everything that the community has said and said, you know what, in order to address what is unfolding in our communities, you have to engage with the stakeholders, you have to engage with the people living here. And it's just as if that is falling on deaf ears. There's no will to actually impact and make a change in Eldorado Park. We said as well that SAPS alone cannot address the situation. We need NPA, we need DSD, we need education, because at this point, what I see unfolding, and I could be wrong, it's just sheer thrill-seeking behavior and a sense of belonging. And what makes me say this is because you have a group of boys at the end of the day, in the afternoons after school, sitting next to the flats in Extension 2 and, tattooing with a blade and some ink, a gang name on their necks and on their shoulders. They've never met these gangsters. They've never been up close with any of these gang heads, but yet they feel they want to be a part of. We have principals calling us and saying to us, you know what, everyone at the school wants to be a gangster. And you hear kids playing in some of these areas because they've been subjected to these killings for the longest time ever, saying that I am this gangster, and the other one saying that gangster. And that is as a result of the socioeconomic condition of this community. Right. Welcome said it. There's no opportunities. There's no development in this area. There's absolutely nothing going on. The only thing we are highlighting is the drugs, the crime, and the shooting. But other than that, nothing is happening.
And I think that's a great point where we can come to you, Welcome, because you obviously, talk to the youth. You see the youth. You can see what they're up to. This picture that Dereleen is painting here of the youth sort of tattooing themselves and linking themselves to gang members that they don't even know. And certainly that is linked to the issue of socioeconomic problem. That's what's at the bottom line. So apart from your discussions, because we can address the issue on a surface level where we're talking to police, we're talking maybe to some gang members, but are we addressing what's at the root of the problem? Dereleen, and you've raised it earlier as well, which is the issue of the fact that the youth don't have opportunities. There's nothing going on in their neighborhoods. And so what do they link themselves to? They will link themselves sometimes to things that are not good for them. So are you having more talks that are involved, perhaps? Is it the government that maybe needs to start creating some sort of opportunities there? Private sector? I mean, the talks should certainly be taking a bigger spin than just addressing it on a surface level.
Yeah, my fear here is that once we think that this is just an Eldorado Park or Westbury issue, that's where we are wrong, because these things can escalate into other communities, surrounding areas as well. So I feel like government has a huge role to play. It's the first thing of just stop lying to people, saying that you are doing something and then you are not doing something. Stop promising us that you're going to do something and then whether you do not deliver it, because people are now at the left and we say, now, how do we fend for ourselves? So when we speak to young people, we try to encourage them to say that we can't just tell them to step away or move away from joining the gangs, because what is the substitute in place? What is it that we put in place for them to say, move away from that? So gang leaders are well aware of the fact that these kids are struggling, their families are struggling, their parents are struggling, and they feel like they are the only solution to their problems, and they step in and they kind of like become the Robin Hoods, and those Robin Hoods literally do not tell you what the consequences are of joining the gangs, where these young people lose their lives just for the mere fact, as Dereleen said, a sense of belonging. So for me, I feel like at this specific moment, even speaking to gang leaders, and when we are in negotiations, the only thing that comes up is they all operating from a place of hurt, from a place of, I want to be heard, I want to be seen, government is not looking at me, this one is not looking at me. It's just big men who are still basically caught up in their childhood of being hurt, of being, they feel like nobody's listening to them.
Look, I mean, we're playing a clip here from one of the provinces, and one of the youth there that was also involved in the wrong side of the law said, at the end of the day, I matter. I'm also a person, and I think that's what it is at the core of the issue here. But Dereleen, let me bring you back in. I want to talk about these talks that you're having, Welcome, that you're also involved with. But talk to us, maybe paint a picture for our viewers. The structure of these talks, how you're having these talks, because I'm trying to imagine you having, a roundtable conversation with the gang members or gang leaders. I mean, how are these, if you can just bring us in, how are you doing this?
Are you posing that question at me or
Dereleen, yes, Dereleen, yes, to you.
Okay, I think we've been having discussions and roundtable talks mainly focusing on government, the various governmental departments, and we said how this. I think Welcome can speak more about the negotiations with the gangs, but for us it's been how do we implement the National Drug Master Plan 2019 to 2021 that is supposed to be the response document in addressing substance use disorder in our country, that speaks to recreation, that speaks to intervention, that speaks to rehabilitation, that speaks to aftercare. How are we implementing this? That speaks to policing and all of that. And I don't see the National Drug Master Plan unfolding in our communities. Let me give you an example where you have a 30-year-old lady that's been coming to me for over the past month, and she is being raped daily. Every night she has to sleep in a lolly lounge where men are forcing themselves on her. She's HIV positive, and she's been waiting over a month for a bed. And the result why she's waiting for a month is because Panyaza Lesufi has centralized all the beds to the province. So now we're saying, even though you are now waiting to go into rehab, what is SAP? So the responsibility is on DSD to create a bed for you in terms of rehabilitation. And then also, what are we doing about the lolly lounge where she's being raped daily?
Yeah.
So do you see the integrated and the multi-sectoral response that we need to have when we address these crimes? For as long as we address these issues and all of these social ills in silos where we think it's only the responsibility of SAPS, it is only the responsibility of DSD, we're not going to yield any results. For as long as we're going to have many raids and hundreds and thousands of boots on the ground in our community, and we're going to have arrests where people are going to go and do raids and whatever, the loopholes within the justice system where you went onto my premises without a search warrant and the case is struck off the roll. Those are the challenges and the realities that we need to address.
Yeah, and
Welcome. And that we have been addressing with the various departments.
All right. Welcome. Let me bring you in then, and sort of in the same tone there. Let's talk about how you're structuring the negotiations then on the ground when it comes to the gangs themselves. And are you not fearful? I mean, at the end of the day, you're not just speaking to a flow. You're speaking to people who perhaps are armed. You're speaking to people who can quite certainly end your life if they want to. And here you are saying, stop what you're doing. Perhaps they consider it's their only way of life, and you're coming in saying this is not a way of life. And one might ask, okay, then what is my way of life then, if this isn't the way of life? Because there's nothing else out there for us. So talk to me about that and how the experience really has been for you.
Some people sometimes say that, how do you negotiate with people that are doing these things?
Yeah.
And I sometimes say that you're speaking to fathers, you're speaking to brothers, you speak to men that have homes, you speak to men that have wives.
Yeah.
These men are also part of our community. And we cannot kind of like say, you know what, they're not part of it, so therefore let's not talk to them. I feel like everybody deserves to be heard, so that they can say what is actually really going on the ground, and how do we support each other, and how do we bring families together at the end of the day. So as you ask how we structure these things, is we have the police involved in these conversations. We call it the midnight talks, where these talks are happening obviously after hours, where everybody can be available for these conversations to take place. Yes, men are armed, but we do ask them that they please, disarm themselves as they step into a circle. And we discuss these topics and say, what is the actual problem?
And what sort of feedback do you get? I mean, are we talking about rational, conversations that are being had?
No, I mean, the thing is, like I said, we speak to fathers, men that are saying, I'm just protecting my territory. And you must remember, most of these men have been brainwashed to believe that what they are doing is right. They believe that what they are fighting for is predominantly something that has been going on for millennia. So they believe, and I mean, that the number system as well, 286 years old. I mean, Paulsmoor prison has taught us 26 to 27, 28. It's that type of thing where people are enshrined themselves into that, believing that what they are doing is right. So now we're coming into a circle and letting these men know that we get where you are coming from. But is there another way that we can do this? How do we involve you? How do we but we can only tell them that this is what we are prepared to do. Other stakeholders like government, other institutions also need to come to the table and say, okay, cool, if these young boys are stepping away from the life of crime, do businesses open up their doors to employ these young people? If these kids have been expelled from a school, do schools say, let's give these kids a second chance? every department head, every department agency needs to play their role in making sure that we can do this. And also parents, at the end of the day, they also have a role to play. As like, do not deny and say my child is not in the gangs. Do not say that Frikkie did not steal the phone, when you know as a mother that you did not buy Frikkie an iPhone 13. I mean, you're using a Mobicel yourself. So for me, those are the types of things of saying that our communities must also stop living in denial. We do have a problem. And as long as we deny that we have a problem, gang leaders and the formality of gangsterism will continue to exist, because that framework only feeds on fear, feeds on people that are afraid to admit that they need help. And that is why we're saying that our communities are living in fear, but they do not know what to do. Hence, I cannot step in and say to myself that I'm afraid, I'm scared, I'm a father myself. But at the end of the day, somebody has to do the work. And we need to remind these men that they are fathers, and therefore step back and take your position as real men.
All right. I wish we had more time. Unfortunately, I've been told to wrap up. But I really appreciate your time, and certainly the work that both of you are doing. You're not just doing it for your community. You're certainly doing it for other communities. As you say, this could very easily spill into other communities. I'm from Soweto myself, so I certainly understand how easily these things can spill into other communities. So many thanks to both of you for coming in to talk to us, but also for the work that you do. That is welcome. Witbooi and Dereleen James, of course, they're part of this negotiation team in the community.